Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah, we've just one more speaker quickly, and then we'll be almost to you.
That's perfect, no problem at all. Should I just, what do you want me to do? Just sort of hang around until you're ready to
Um,
broadcast my presentation? Should
yeah,
I
that
share my screen on the meantime?
we're just going to share our screen quickly for the previous speaker, and then we'll come to you in a moment.
Okay, that's
Just
perfect.
about 15 minutes.
That's 100%, no problem.
Um,
Oh, so the slides, should I be sharing from my side or is that
I
okay?
think, yeah, I think you can, but we'll just do ours quickly first.
Okay, great. Yeah, I made one small change.
So, why isn't anything? What's going on? I can't see. Go to the next.
Yeah, you guys quite hectic there today. There's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Sorry. Here are our slides. Um, slideshow. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming and joining today, and thank you to the first guest through Zoom. My name is Brian. I'm a surgeon medic. I'm just going to speak about 10 minutes for a project that we've been working on, or going into our second year now, on AMR. It's a project that I've been working in collaboration with some fellow students here at Trinity. And what we really set out to do in this project is to try and figure out what the current status of AMR was in terms of policy making. So we were interested in trying to think about what policies are there that prevent misusage of AMR, what are the gaps in those policies, and what can we do to make those better. So it was really from policy making. I think since then the scope has widened a little bit, but the original aim of the project sort of remains the same. And I think I'll be talking through the project, but I think the main takeaway to just say about AMR is that it's a multifaceted issue. There is no single cause of AMR that you're going to find and that's going to sort it. It's impacting multiple industries, multiple stakeholders, some with more exposure than others, but all are relevant. Everything that we do has an impact. Everything that a pharmaceutical company does has an impact. The water we drink, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, everything has an impact. Everything has an impact. And what we basically set out to kind of figure out in this project was, it was a collaboration between Trinity AMR Action Group and Collegia. That's a student health, voluntary student health policy body. And we began the project in June of 2022. It's still ongoing. And we tried to essentially examine policy adherence and best practices. That really was the main aim here. How well are AMR policies adhered to, and are best practices being followed? There's a difference. You can have legislation, you can follow it, but is that legislation up to the best standard? And that's the difference that we obviously were also looking at and quite interested in seeing, because it's the gap between where we're currently at and the ideal state where we want to be at. And that gap is important to kind of try and figure out. And also, how do we fill that gap? So it was a collaboration between these two organizations, I might say, and there's 3 people currently working on it. It was much larger when we started, but we've narrowed down the scope a little bit since then, or we've done quite a lot of work since then as well. So it's me, myself, it's Martin, the speaker you had previously. He was the ex-Trin AMR president, and Angelica, who is the vice president for the Trinity branch of Collegia. And in doing this project, we worked with a range of stakeholders. But we split the project into two phases, which we thought were probably it was the most perhaps well, it was a sensible way to go about it. The first phase was to kind of try and figure out AMR policy adherence across multiple industries. So that essentially, well, specifically included really company policies. So we're looking at corporate level, and we looked at the restaurant sectors, fast foods, producers. So that includes farmers, agriculture, and so forth, and retailers. All of these stakeholders are arranged in a chain. It all starts with the producers, and it carries on all through to corporate level to the burgers you eat at McDonald's. Every step of that process matters, and there is multiple levels where you can have influence. McDonald's can influence its producers to change its practices. The government can give incentives to producers to change its practices. But it's all really linked. And just focusing a little bit on the first part, well, in the second part as well, just I'll quickly mention, I'll go into more detail later on, but it's due diligence for investors. And we figured out that actually investors were a very, very, very important group to kind of tackle, because they have, unsurprisingly, exposure on the market quite a lot. I mean, if we just talk a little bit about fund managers like Vanguard, I mean, they own, we're talking about roughly, quite a significant stake of producers in the USA. And that's before even you get to more recent investments that have been made in that space. So we're trying to figure out as well what due diligence investors can follow. And what we were surprised by, I think, to find out is there's very little guidance from a legislative perspective for investors. Investors make up the biggest significant group that can influence decisions at the level of a company, at the level of producers as well. But there's no guidance. The WHO has no guidance virtually on investors, which we found to be quite strange. So the first part of the project was on policy adherence. So what do we mean by policy adherence, and what was the aim here? What were we trying to get out of policy adherence? And I think there's a couple of things that I've tried to summarize in here. So we started out by trying to examine the policy. So we looked at a lot of producers and a lot of fast food chain restaurants like McDonald's, like Pizza Express, every kind of major retail brand that deals with food and agriculture and so forth. So we tried to figure out what it is that basically, what was their policy? Did they have an AMR policy? If so, how ambitious was it? I think we were a little bit surprised to figure out that there was a huge variation. We thought maybe the industry would be more streamlined, but it wasn't. Some are better at policy making than others, but that was only part of it. We also tried to identify gaps, and we tried to also understand the challenges to policy implementation. So some companies might say that we want to make those changes, but there's really no platform where we can make those changes. If McDonald's says, okay, we want all of our consumers to stop using antibiotics, the problem they have is, how do they know? How do they know that their producers will comply with those things? And that brings us to a very, very important point, which was independent third-party audits. That was perhaps maybe the biggest legislative suggestion that we are making. It's not new. If you go right now to Sainsbury's and you're going to buy meat, you'll see British Red Tractor. So those third-party audits already exist as a vehicle, as a mechanism. Our aim is to try and, well, what we should be doing is we should be able to adjust that so we can also take into account AMR and antibiotic usage. So welfare already exists. Antibiotic usage should really be no different. And yeah, so making improvements is perhaps the kind of the main aim of this. But also understand that AMR policy is multifaceted in and of itself, because there's so many there's many players. It's not fair. It is not fair, and I repeat, it really isn't fair to ask a producer to completely stop using antibiotics. It's the best thing we can do, but it's not fair, because that person or that company or those employees have to make a living. And we also very much enjoy the products they produce. The aim here is to try and gradually phase out antibiotics, but also offer incentives and economic protection. Farmers aren't going to be stopped using antibiotics because they themselves are under financial pressure. This is very much a two-way game. You're asking them out of something, but you also need to expect them to be given something back. And I think that is also one of the main things I'd like just to point out in this whole idea of policy, because making policy is great, but how do you implement it? So that's perhaps maybe the main thing. And we went also about trying to examine policy by making a questionnaire. I'm showing here a snapshot of that questionnaire, which was sent out to many, many companies, and we're still working at the moment. This is still work in progress, 2 years on. I can't believe it, but still work in progress. So we're trying to basically figure out to what extent AMR impacted companies and how they were dealing with it, and what improvements had they themselves made. So that was essentially how we that was our primary research. So we didn't just rely on secondhand reports that came from shareholder meetings. We also tried to actually study ourselves and see what it is that they're doing to tackle it at the corporate level, especially. So that was the first part. The second part of the project, which was on due diligence for investors. This is quite interesting because we didn't really plan on going that much into due diligence, but it turned out to be quite important. This is where it comes to the point, well, the idea that we try to promote here is the idea of universal ownership. That idea was presented to us when we had a meeting with LG. Actually, we had quite a few meetings with LG. LG is a major financial investor, and it's an investor in many, many different companies, but particularly so in the fast food restaurant. It holds quite a large stakehold, for instance, in McDonald's. And what we try to do in this due diligence report is try to produce a report that I, as an investor, can ask a company that manages my money about what it is they do in terms of AMR. So for instance, if you've got an investor and they have a personal agenda, how is it that they can work with fund managers, the people who are managing their money, they're the asset managers. How can they work together to figure out what's the best practice that they can follow? Not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do because the fund managers themselves have a portfolio. They'll have hundreds of portfolios that they need to, and they have to pick one of those for their client. And the point here is, if they don't have any mechanisms in place to discriminate between what are good stocks for AMR sustainability and what are bad stocks for AMR sustainability, I mean, that's maybe too broad of an overview, but it gets the point across, I think. So we've been making essentially a document that we're almost in the final stages of. And there's been a lot of stakeholders involved in this process. LG has been one of them. We've been working with the Trinity College asset managers as well, and FAIR, which is an organization that was started in the US. And it's all essentially about how investors can work to make AMR, obviously a forefront issue, just like climate change is. And that's been quite successful. The main idea I'd like to say here is the idea of universal ownership. What that means is that we all work together to sort the issue out, but it also means that the emphasis really is on the investor. I, as an investor, maybe might have quite a lot of wealth that need to be managed. So the aim here is on the investor to really go out and seek what are the best options for themselves. So we're making this an active process rather than just passively handing the money out and expecting someone to manage it in the way that you'd like. But you actually have to go and figure out yourself. Not an easy process again, but it's perhaps something that can be best done. And this is basically just the opening of our due diligence report. It goes on for quite a few pages and it asks a lot of questions. It's concerned with how the portfolios are managed, how are they analyzed, how is it that you update? So the whole process from actually picking out a stock that is good all the way through to actually having that stock quality checked and quality assured all the time to ensure it's compliant with whatever it is that you're setting out. If you don't believe me on the importance of that asset managers can have, this is a slide that you might not be able to read quite a lot, but it's from the shareholders meeting for McDonald's. It happened in, I think, April of 2023, so it was this year. Now, LG owns quite a lot of McDonald's. McDonald's was a key player when it came to AMR. They were perhaps the best, they had the best corporate level policy out there, because they not only said we're going to stop using poultry that has been raised using antibiotics. They went a step further. They were doing trials across Brazil, across Europe as well, and trying to try out their policy, and they were the best at developing it. They had taken the most initiative. Since then, this was back in 2018 when they took those initiatives. Since then, they haven't really delivered. And it turned out that LG and quite a few of other shareholders said in their report, and I'll quote, McDonald's decision not to prioritize broad AMR risks does not account for its diversified owners' interest in optimizing public health, the economy, and the long-term portfolio returns. So the idea, what basically LG is saying here is you need to prioritize AMR, not just because it's good for the consumer, but also because it's really, really good for the economics of McDonald's. If you don't have your stocks analyzed in terms of AMR risk, if something happens, say your biggest producer in Brazil suffers an outbreak, that's pretty bad news for McDonald's, because now suddenly its biggest supplier has just gone out of business or is struggling. So the idea here is to not just help, obviously, public health, but also help themselves in diversifying their portfolio. In other words, investing in stocks that don't have so much exposure to AMR, and making that perhaps maybe the emphasis, so that over the long term, you're not such exposed to the risk. Now I have more stocks that are related to, I don't know, maybe tech, as opposed to stocks that are in producers, or even stocks that are in producers that don't use antibiotics, rather than ones that do. It's all the idea about diversifying risk and minimizing the impact of AMR for the rest of us. So it's a big issue. I think policymaking will play a big role, but it's not as easy as just making policies and having them ratified. Because McDonald's did that in 2018. It didn't really get anywhere past that. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, let me know. But yeah, thank you.